Meeting starting. Okay, good morning all. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
Let's hear a big loud hello.
Hello.
Okay, you're all awake. That's good to hear. Welcome to Cowcatcher Division May meeting. We're gonna kick it off. We got a good clinic today with Tom Pearson talking about how to wire your layout. And before we get started, David, I want to thank you and the Texas Western for letting us meet here.
Nick, we can't hear you back here.
Well, quit talking and you might be able to hear. Is that better? Yeah. Hey, guys in the back. You know, you got to come to the meeting. You got to listen. Anyways, can you hear me now? Okay. Do you have anything,
Yes.
David?
Yes. First of all, welcome to the Texas Western. Even you guys in the back eating donuts.
Ben Kaiser.
Come on up. Come on up. We want to welcome you to the Texas Western. How many of you have not been here before? Great. Welcome. Welcome. If you haven't been here before, this is the Texas Western Model Railroad Club. We are glad to have you here. We're glad to be able to host this meeting every month. We'd love for you to come. We are particularly wanting today to point out to you three big things that are happening. If you notice along the side wall, that is the Fort Worth Stockyards. That was built by Jerry Fussell right here on the old layout. Now that has actually been in our structure room for several years, and we finally decided to go ahead and start putting it together. And at some point, that will slide onto the layout as it expands. So that's the Fort Worth Stockyards. Number two is if you haven't been to Batson Hill, which is the area built up around our helix next to the kitchen, that area we named after Joe Batson, who passed away about 3 years ago. Joe was an incredible modeler and did a lot of great things for the club. And Daryl Cowles decided to do some modifications, some upgrading, some changes in terrain. So Daryl has been working on that for several months now. Don't get out of here today without going and looking around Batson Hill and looking at the incredible work that he's done to rehab some of those areas that were damaged and needed to be upgraded. Also, make sure you see the Houston terminal area that goes from the Houston terminal all the way out to where the port of Houston begins, or what we call the bays, the port. So make sure you see those areas today. Those have come a long way. They're changing every week. One thing to point out to you is, as you know, or probably have seen in the announcement, Prototype Modelers Convention is going to be at the Forest Hill Community Center June the 24th, just right over here, a mile and a half away over on Wichita. How many of you have gone to or will be going to the Prototype Modeler Convention? Great, most everybody. If you've ever been, it's a wonderful event. Please come. In conjunction with that, we're going to have an open house here, where we'll be running trains, probably 4 or 5 sets of trains we'll be running. We're also going to have an area set up like our garage sale. It won't be as full blown as our usual garage sale, but we're only going to put out the best of the best. We've got some O-scale wood kits. We've got a lot of other things that are what we would consider higher quality that would appeal to the prototype modelers. We've also got a railroad light, pole. We've got a lot of things to set out June the 24th. So after you finish with the prototype modelers, scoot over here. It's free, unless you buy something. Admission is free though. But please come on by, and we'll be sending out more announcements to remind you about our open house June the 24th. Thank you, Dick.
You're very welcome, Dave. I want to announce a couple of changes that we've made in our leadership team. Cole Rash has stepped down as program manager. And Cole, you were here. He's on the phone. Okay. And Cole has stepped down. I want to give him a big thank you for serving as program manager. And assuming Cole's duties are taken over, is Jim Ogden. Jim, would you stand up? Welcome to the leadership team, Jim. And we also have Ed McGinley, who is going to pick up the whistle responsibilities from David Hager. They're in a transition period right now. David, are you here? Yes, he's not here. Okay. Ed, would you please stand up? Welcome to the leadership team. Thank you very much for your service. David Bryan?
Yes, what?
You want to give a treasury report?
Happy to report we have money.
Good. Yay.
The beginning balance was 3808 at the beginning of April. End of April, after expenditures of $220, receipts of 157, and now have 3745. That's called a negative cash flow.
Thank you, David.
You're welcome.
And speaking of, since David didn't mention it, we've got a pig back there for the donation pot for all the coffee and donuts. Please feed the donation pot. We need the money to cover our expenses on that, on the refreshments.
Hence the negative cash flow.
Yes. Thank you, David. Did you file any reports this month?
I filed the federal tax report that we're required to do.
And the state of Texas tax exempt report?
What?
Thank you, David.
I think that's a no.
Okay. How about visitors and new members to the meetings? Could you please raise your hand and stand up, introduce yourself?
My name is Ed Williams. I was in model railroading for a while and I got out of it because of health reasons, and I'm trying to get back into it.
What scale do you model it at?
And
In scale?
Where do you live?
I live on the west side of Fort Worth, just west of White Settlement.
Oh, good. David Bryan is an N-scale modeler too.
Other normal person.
Yeah, or other than normal, something like that. How about any other visitors or new members? Okay, thank you very much. There's one thing we're going to start next month, which we kind of borrowed from Division 3. We're going to have a member of the division will have an open house after the meeting, and we will be able to go over and tour his layout. We will announce the address of the layout and the new member's name, of course, during the meeting next month. And the intent here is, of course, is to kind of encourage people to come to the meeting and see other members' layouts. So that'll start next month. We have June and July scheduled right now. People have volunteered their layouts. If you'd like to volunteer your layout for an open house on a Saturday after a cowcatcher meeting, see me and we'll get you in rotation. Okay? Thank you very much. Regional news, of course, we have the couple things coming up in May and in June. In May, we have that's May 20th and 21st, is the Jefferson Train Show. It's in Jefferson, Texas. It's open from Saturday from 10 to 5 and Sunday 10 to 4. Admission is about $8. It's a great train show to see, great layout to see, and Jefferson's kind of a cute town to visit. Your wife would enjoy going there too, I'm sure. The other thing is, David touched on this, is we got the Red River Prototype Modelers meeting. It's meeting Saturday, June 24th at the Convention Center, the Forest Hill Convention Center, which is right over here on Wichita. We're going to be there. The NMRA is going to be there with a booth. And they are also looking for people to put on clinics. I have one member from this division that's going to put on a clinic right now, already scheduled. Would like to have one more. If you put on a clinic, you get free admission. So that's a good incentive, and it'll allow you to practice if you got a clinic that you're putting on for the convention, it's a good way to practice that in front of a live audience. So once again, see me after the meeting, and I'll get you signed up for that. Okay? From a national standpoint, of course, the big news is we got Texas Western, or the Texas Express coming up in August. Please register for the convention. I'm sure you've heard this a number of times already. You're pretty familiar with it, but it's never too late to remind everybody to sign up. The discount registration sheet or registration fee, I think, ends at the month of June. So time is of the essence. Okay, let's go and move into awards in the AP talk. Dwayne?
Morning, gents. So we've been breaking down the AP categories and stuff so far this year, and wanted to talk about motive power this month. This one is not handed out very often. There aren't too many people who are willing to try to scratch build a locomotive. We got a couple of guys back here who've done a stellar job with it a couple of times, but this is something that doesn't get awarded much. There's a lot of work involved in it because you have to build one locomotive completely from scratch, and you have to super detail two others. All three have to merit. The trick that a lot of people bump into is around the scratch build. Super detailing a locomotive isn't all that difficult, and when you start thinking about what the requirements of it, you can't just take your basic shell and start gluing on a few pieces. That's not going to get you there. You're going to have to take a shell of a whatever -2 and turn it into a -9 or whatever you guys that do diesels talk about. If you're talking about steam engines, we're talking about putting in a full backhead, firebox lights, all the other bells and whistles that normally don't come on one if you get them. Building from scratch, though, is the part that trips a lot of people up because you have to make the frame of the locomotive, period. It's in the requirements. It has always been in the requirements. There have been a couple of guys who have been lobbying national now almost 2 decades long that I know of, because someone made a really nice locomotive, and it is a stunning piece of work. I've seen some pictures of it. He didn't make the frame. And that's the number one thing it tells you in the rules. You have to make the frame from scratch, whether it's steam or diesel. If you're making steam, you got to make all your side rods. It's all got to work. If you're making a diesel, you got to make the side frames on the trucks. Not easy, but not overly hard. But it's the frame that trips a lot of people up. A lot of it gets down to how much modification can you do to a model to get it to qualify for super detail. And it's going to take a lot of work. It's not just going to be something you can just start, gluing down some brass parts to it and calling it good. It's going to take some modification to make this happen. If you're doing diesels, leave the door open, take a door off. Again, change it from one version to another. Kit bash it into something completely different. Whatever it is you think you need to do. A lot of guys for scratch build a rail bus, build a little critter, things like that. Those are always fun. They came in every shape, form, and size, and you can find a prototype for almost anything. So it gets down to do your research, figure out what you're going to work with, and then come up with a good plan of attack. If you've got any questions about that, definitely feel free to run it by me, and I'll give you some pointers or let you know whether or not your ideas are going to work, or if it's going to be enough that it should be able to get you across the finish line. So I'm not saying that it's impossible to do. I'm just not going to blow smoke up your kilt and let you know that it's easy to do either. It takes some work, and it is one of the harder ones to get. So I would highly encourage everyone to do it. I admittedly have not done it yet. I have one of the super detailed ones down, 2 others to go. It will be the last one I get, but it will be number 11 for me. So it's one of those things. It's a real adventure. That being said, we have one certificate to hand out today. I didn't get it in time for last month, but we got it here this time. Mr. Cole, front and center, brother. Cole earned his volunteer. All right. And we soon to see more paperwork from him on a couple of other things. Cool. That's good. Now, notice on the certificate, and you see these copies up here on the wall, they've got the little gold deal and the little red ribbons. Cole, I think you got the last of the ones with the old stickers on them. From now on, instead of the gold deal, they've got an NMRA logo sticker. So there's been a large number of complaints about that I've already seen online. So we'll see how long that lasts. But at any rate, get your paperwork to me. We're working out a kink on Mr. Waters' scenery, but we'll get that ironed out and get his paperwork submitted. We've got a couple of other things we need to be working on. Yeah, Mr. Atkins, you probably qualify for 2 or 3. We just need to get you put some pen to paper. So, guys, seriously, I know that I can look across this room right now, and I know of at least 3 or 4 of you that, yeah, you can hide all you want, Grind, but I know you're one of them that really need to just put some pen to paper and get some stuff to hang on the wall. So, if there's anything I can help you with, let me know. Thank you, sir.
You want to move into tips and tricks too?
Sure, why not? Why not? Kicking off tips and tricks. I may have mentioned this one once in the past in a course of a clinic. I don't know. I was thinking about it on the drive over here and seeing how y'all are starting to get busy on scenery around here. One of the things that you'll see a lot of people do in articles, in YouTube videos, in the old DVDs you could rent from the train store and all that, was they would tell you to, wet your scenery base. Once you get it down, wet it down with some wet water, where you just take a drop or so of dish detergent, put it in a spray bottle and wet it down. And then come back in with your white glue and water. So 2 modifications to that I highly recommend. Number 1, always make sure that your white glue is not the Elmer's school glue. That is designed to dissolve away in water, so it wipes off your kids' pants when they're working on their project at school and go, so make sure it's regular Elmer's. Don't get it on too thick because it can dry in puddles and create a nice little shiny spot. Why a lot of guys like to use matte medium instead of glue. Number 2, instead of mixing your glue solution and putting it out with your eyedropper with water, use rubbing alcohol. Or use rubbing alcohol in a spray bottle instead of the wet water, and wet it down with the rubbing alcohol, and then come back in with your matte medium and water or glue and water. The alcohol absorbs water, so it will help that water glue mixture spread further, faster, and more evenly. And a lot of times, also because it's absorbing it, you don't end up with a puddling situation that you can end up with from time to time in between places. So give that a rip and see what you think.
I did that on my previous layout. It worked great.
Yeah.
Other than I had painted all the ties ahead of time with acrylics. All the acrylic came off.
Yeah. If you're going to do your ties that way, yeah. I like to stain my ties, but yeah, I've seen that one before. And if you're going to do it that way, yes, clear coat your ties first, because yeah, otherwise all that's going to come off. Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, speaking of doing the scenery work between the rails on the track, please use the rubbing alcohol, because it works a whole lot better. Because when you talk about puddling and you're trying to put down ballast,
yeah, and ballast is tricky because you start looking at different manufacturers as to what it's made out of, and you would think it's probably some sort of rock. Woodland Scenics isn't. It's actually walnut shells, and they dye those. Here's the problem: that floats. You start getting too much water in it. Next thing you know, your ballast is floating away. Prototypical, yes, but it looks bad on a model. And the rubbing alcohol kind of help prevent that too. It doesn't make it boil as well.
Well, it's to me, it's the after the ballasting that's the issue, because if you're using Woodland Scenics and it does float, it dries to the webbing of the track.
Yes.
And it interferes a lot of times with the flanges on your wheels.
Yeah.
So you end up having to go back through and scrape it, which basically means you just did twice the work.
Exactly. Yeah, and part of that, you shot yourself in the foot doing it.
Yeah.
That's one of those where after you get your ballast down, it really pays to take a good paintbrush and see if you can find something that's about the width of your rails and come in and pass that down and get it down right even with the top of your ties or slightly below, depending on what you're modeling and all that kind of stuff. But people where they really run into that problem a lot is where you get this really high ballast in there, and then it floats and runs up the rails, and then you got to go back in with a dental pick and do a lot of cleanup.
So I was working on a friend of mine's module a couple weeks ago, and we laid everything out. We got all the ballast down. What we didn't realize is that when he laid out his track work on top of his module, he used a red Sharpie to do it. And then we got everything laid out. We got it all done. And the alcohol, a week later, brought all that red ink up through the ballast.
Oh.
So he had red ink all over the place.
Oh,
So he had to scrape it all out and then
ouch.
go back. Yeah, it was
Well, that's a new one.
not pretty.
Hey, when you talk about rubbing alcohol or isopropyl alcohol?
Same thing.
Yeah, same thing.
Is it the same thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, 90%.
Yeah,
You can use 90%, 70% will do for most of your scenery stuff.
yeah.
90% is when you really want to go in and be doing detail work, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I use the 90 for everything. We've talked about it before for making up your own stains and things for making your Indian ink and alcohol stains and stuff. I like the 90% because more alcohol means less water means less warping. But I like it for the scenery as well because if there's less water in it, there's more alcohol in it to absorb that water. It helps it spread better. Mike.
Mr. Cranda, look at your text message, please. Talking about ballasting, a little tip that I learned from a friend of ours out in California who's done a couple of presentations for it, Rich Mossholder. If you're familiar on the, when you're doing corner work on painting, there's a little bitty foam, like it's about a 1-inch wide foam brush. Now, I'm not talking about the gray brushes that have metal points on it. This is actually a thing you get over in the painter's supply area, not in a craft area, but at Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever.
Yep.
And if you
Little
take
white
that,
pad,
yeah, it's got a handle on it, and it's interchangeable pads. You can take the pad off, put a new one on. If you put your ballast down and put the ballast right in the middle of the track, and then wipe that little sponge thing across the top, it will take your ballast, drop it down below the ties, and take anything else that's extra and spread it on the outside of the rail exactly like you would if you were putting it down in the real thing.
Yep.
And it makes ballasting quick and easy. I mean, you can do it in, a third of the time as far as applying the ballast. So check that out. I'm sorry I didn't bring one with me, but I'm getting ready to do a lot of ballasting for a client out in West Texas, and I'll be taking 2 of those out there.
Yeah.
The final thing is, and Mr. Cranda has pulled it up on your screen, this past week I found a new website that I wanted to share with you guys. It's called Hobbyist Haven, Haven, and it's kind of akin to Micromart, but they've got other things on there that you wouldn't really find on Micromart. They've got pretty good pricing, but they've got all kinds of stuff in here, especially for super detailing and tools and things like that. I would really urge you to go over and take a look at it. It's a pretty good little source there. I'm going to be buying some different things, and if you look, they're doing certain things that you'll find most military modelers doing. And if you've not checked out what the military modelers are doing in their detailing and their dioramas and stuff, they are just fantastic with some of the stuff they're doing. Now, granted, the scale is a little larger for some of the stuff they're doing, but we can still take the same format and move it to our scales, whatever we have to be doing. But anyway, these are some things that I thought you might want to take a look at. That's the reason I asked Mr. Crandon to pull it up.
Now, to add to something Mike mentioned before, if you get too much in there, that's a bit of an art, and it's a learned thing. Anything you do to spread your ballast out, if you get too much in it, you're going to have a bit of a mess to clean up. So the idea is to start off with what you think is too little and try it and see. But you don't want to just throw a big pile of it on there and then start trying to work it around, because then you end up with the problem Jeff was talking about. You might get it spread out real nice and easy, but now you've got it piled up against the inside of your rails, and that can cause a world of heartache. So it's one of those less is more kind of moments, so you get to play around with it. David.
Getting back to 90% alcohol.
Yeah.
I used it to thin some white glue without adding water. It curdled the white.
I've heard of people having that problem.
Yeah. So make sure you don't use 50-50. It's not 50% glue, 50%, 90% alcohol.
That's one of the reasons why I like to put the rubbing alcohol down first and then do the water and the glue.
I'm just saying you can mix the alcohol with water.
Yeah.
50-50, now you got 25% alcohol, 25% water, 50% glue, that works.
Yeah, and-
100%, 90% alcohol, now you end up with cottage cheese.
yeah. I've seen a lot of people too come back in and put their glue or their matte medium down with either a pipette or an eyedropper. Do yourself a favor, if you don't wear contacts or your wife doesn't wear contacts, go over to Walmart and buy you a bottle of contact lens saline solution and mix your stuff up in that, because the lid will either unscrew or it'll pop off if you pry it off. You can mix your glue and water into that, and it's made to do drops at a time. So you're not constantly dip, squirt. You just come in there and layer it all down and keep right on moving, so help you move a little quicker.
If you're looking for spray bottles, probably the finest I've ever seen, go to Great Clips. And on the counter, they have a spray bottle. It's clear, it's got a plastic bag, black. They use it for misting women's hair. It's $10. Yeah, but they're on the counter at Great Clips right next to it. Don't keep your hair there.
Yeah. Yeah, because you want to really find mist with it. If you start getting anything that's got any really good sized droplets, then you start moving your scenery around where you don't want it. And it's a bit of that's another one of those learned skills. How close do I get? How far away do I get? The further away that you can get and still get it to wet down where you want it to get wet, the better.
There's a bottle, the supervisor talking about, I got it at Amazon about a month ago, depending on the size, from $7 to $12.
Cool.
It's extremely fine. It's
Very,
much
very
finer.
fine.
Yeah.
Fine
Much
as I've ever
finer than
seen.
the Scenic Express spray bottle, which comes out in droplets.
Yeah.
This is extraordinarily tight. It's almost like pressurized. It's not. It's almost like it's pressurized.
Even after you squirt it, it's still comes second.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Sweet, thank you, Dwayne.
You bet.
Okay, let's go into a question and answer period. Who's having trouble? What's giving you problems on your layout or in your modeling? Anybody having issues they want to talk about and get help from the group?
Everybody's perfect.
Everybody's in good shape. There's no issues on a model railroad. Come on. David Bryan.
I'm currently putting in 3 bridges on my layout. One of them requires a bridge pier, 2 different heights. I've seen pictures that they're wider than the normal bridge pier and just one side is higher than the other to accommodate the different 2 height bridges coming together. Is
Depends
that?
on the railroad. Depends on the railroad.
Yeah.
The only time I've seen, now granted, I'm talking mostly from Colorado Heritage experience, but the only time I've ever seen bridge piers or vents get wider is if you're putting it on a curve. Curved trestles tend to have wider base vents than straight trestles. You've got inertia moving in a couple of different ways.
Yeah, no, this is straight. Well, what do they do typically when you have 2 different heights in a chute?
Make one taller. I mean, literally, that's the
but
only difference I've ever really seen.
it's 1 pier.
Yeah.
You see them.
So if it's tall, one's taller, they have to be right, right?
You see them when they have a truss and they take vertebrae up more.
Right, exactly.
So which one would be wider, the taller one, I think?
The plate girder is taller. It's literally like a step on the top of the pier.
Right.
And the plate girder sits higher than the truss does.
That's the only picture of it.
Yeah,
It's so
okay.
much wider.
And that's exactly what,
Yeah, I think
exactly
it
what Ed's talking about. This is, so you got the tail end of this.
Yeah, but this is all 1 pier.
Right.
So it's wider, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I was thinking you're talking about wider side to side, you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason for that is the engineering. I mean, you got this girder sitting down lower on this piece of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a neat feature.
And they'll put on your bridge shoes on one side of that thing.
Yeah.
The other one.
It's just the way that other piece of the bridge is built.
Bridge shoes,
Yeah.
generally on one of them. The other one sticks.
Yeah, it's usually on the greater side, if I remember.
Yeah,
right.
and in scale, it's a piece of styrene.
Yeah. Okay, any other issues people are having? Chris?
I need to hire someone to help me wire my layout, BCC. After my accident, I'm not capable of getting it done. I laid the track over a year ago and haven't been able to run any trains. So if anybody knows anybody that would be interested, please contact me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Gary?
I have several steam locomotives that need decoders. I have Soundtrax decoders that are out of warranty because I bought a bunch of them. I took them to a local hobby shop to have them installed in a couple of brass locomotives and got a call back, Gary, the decoders are bad. Well, they were having the same problem I've had in shorting them out. And they said, oh, we don't like these, we'll go with local sound. So, okay. But if there's anyone here that's experienced with Soundtrax and would want to help install
You guys
decoders
hear
and
that
brass
in the back of the room?
locomotives.
He's looking for someone to install Soundtrax decoders in a locomotive.
What am I looking at? No way. Okay.
Okay. Any takers? Okay, any other issues? Okay. Before we go on to show and tell, let's, what do we have for online? Who's online with us today? We got Gordy, we got Mike Ross. Welcome, Gordy. Mike Ross, welcome. Rusty. Steve McGrath, welcome. Gordy, you want to say anything?
Morning.
Good morning. Is that it? It's
No,
late
no,
at night, huh?
Not where he is.
No, this is nothing. No. It's only 4:30, so it's not too late. No, I'm working here on some of the modules for the Texas Express for the Ops Roadshow 3MON layout. So it's what these are over the shoulder. Yeah, the only problem I've got is that I find it very difficult to get any modeling done. So time-wise, but if anyone wants to come to Orkney and help with that, you're welcome to. There's no payment, but it's nice scenery. So, but yeah, thanks for the invite, guys, and it's I'm really looking forward to seeing you all in August. So hopefully you're all registered and got your tours and op sessions all ready, and your layouts are looking fantastic. And we'll see you all in August in person for a change.
Very good. Thank you, Gordy. Anybody else online have any questions or issues? Okay, let's move into show and tell. Chris, you want to go through your breadboard?
Is your fancy camera gonna work?
Yeah, I just.
So my name is Chris Sgaraglino. I am a modeler here in Fort Worth. I'm doing InScale, and I'm also a visual editor. So I do a lot of work with audio and visual. And one of the things that I set my mind to back in December when I started modeling was I did not want a static railroad. I wanted audio in there. I'm not a big fan of watching a nice Steve McQueen movie with the volume turned all the way down. You just can't get the depth of what's going on. And when I walk into somebody's railroad, it's either quiet or all you hear is locomotives. Well, I like to build electronics so that I can put in sound with sensors. So as people walk in and around my layout and as trains are doing things on the layout, they're going to hear subtly in the background things that are going on. If you walk by a creek, you're going to hear creek flowing. If you walk by the cattle yards, you're going to hear cattle in the background. So when I mentioned this to a very close friend that I've met here in Texas, Mike, I won't let anybody know it's you.
Okay.
He was like, wow, that's a great idea. Can you do a hotbox detector? And I'm like, you bet. What's a hotbox detector? I have no clue. I don't know much about the prototype side. I'm learning as I'm building here. So he explained to me what it was, and what I've got here today that I just finished last night that he asked me about 20 minutes before leaving the house this morning to bring in is a simulation of a hotbox detector. Now, one of the things that we're putting into it is we're adding speed. So I built a speed detection module for it as well. We're going to be doing axle counts, so that way we can run, the program will run, we'll say, only trigger the defect detector when it reaches 288 axles or something like that. So the people that are operating on his layout are not going to know when this is going to go off. And then as soon as it does go off, they're supposed to contact their dispatcher to find out what they're supposed to do. So in short, that's what I have here today. And I'm going to show you a demo of it. Now these speakers are quiet. I didn't know that we didn't have audio for the whole room. So hopefully you can hear some of it. So right now it's set up to play, and what it's doing, it's using infrared for its triggers. So I'm gonna go ahead and trigger it. Maybe. I had this issue a few minutes ago. Come on.
WCRR Equipment Defect Detector. Milepost 217.3. Track number 1. Westbound. First defect. Hotbox. At axle 112. North end, west side from head of train. Second defect. Dragging equipment. Near axle 147. Total axle count 186. Train link 3640. End of transmission.
Cool. So basically what's going on here, and I've got parts up here after the meeting, you guys can come up and we can talk about what I did. But what I did was I took a micro mini SD card reader and MP3 player, and then I recorded a slew, about 50 different words. And I'm using the Arduino to go through and based on random algorithms and axle counts that are happening with the speed detector, then I'm putting all the words together like you just heard so that it will actually be accurate. So it's only going to fire on for an example, 288 axles, but it's literally counting from the nose of the train to the tail of the train, and it's going to pick a car within the middle of it that needs to be removed from the situation, resolved. I have hotbox detection. I have dragging equipment detection. I have also added weight. So it'll tell you if the load of the box car or maybe a container has shifted on it in either direction. And then obviously you have a no defect to sound and a variety of other things that the system is just rattling off based on the number of cars and axles and the algorithm that we put in to trigger it. Yes, sir.
How do you figure which one it is? Is that just an algorithm do, or did it just pick one?
So
you pick it.
So what currently, because this is hugely still in the process, it's only about 2 weeks old here. So where I think we're at is we're going to pick a number between, say, 100 and 300, and then the system is randomizing that number. So that way, when it first hits the trigger, it's not going to be the same trigger every single time. It's also deducting the axles for the locomotive. And there's another randomizer that I put in here that is going to pick from one of the 4 different defects that it could be, plus the 5th one, which is no defect.
Do you have to do anything with the axle for it to be
Negative. So,
in a locomotive with a gearbox? What does it do?
Excuse me?
If you have a locomotive with a gearbox, is it all that an axle, or does it stop and screw it off?
So these infrared detectors will pick up about 2,000 hits per millisecond. So they're extremely fast. So if there's any break whatsoever in there, it will do it. Things that will be built in are going to be if the axle count is under a certain number. So let's say it's under 4. Well, there's your locomotives right there. Then it's going to skip and rerun for the next one. Once we get the prototype on a board, it'll be put out, and then we'll work the software until we get some kind of smooth work out of it.
Can you put in, like, if someone just went short trains, 7 or 8 cars, can you say maximum number of axles?
You can. My railroad is actually a maximum of 8 cars with a maximum of 12 on through trains, but the average is only 4. So, and everything I'm doing is 4 axle. So for your each individual situation, you can set your specs at the top of the software and then just dump it to the Arduino and then tweak it as you see necessary. Now, one other thing that Mike and I talked about that he didn't know about, a lot of us do these projects on these breadboards, and we kind of get stuck. How do I get the project off the breadboard? Well, I brought some stuff to look at. These are perf boards. You've probably seen them before, but the difference is these are actually designed as a breadboard. So each individual hole is not independent of each other. So this is an identical to the breadboard that I have up here, and you can just set it down next to it, plug it in, solder it, and you're good to go. And they make them in a variety of different sizes. You guys can look at these when we're done up here. The other thing is you can't, I don't think you can see it real quick. Can you guys see that on the screen?
This one,
Yeah. Is that any better? So this project here is the speedometer, and it will also have the axle counting in it. So when you come across, it's going to calculate the speed. I lied. There it goes. So it's going to actually calculate the speed. And in the program I wrote, I have a section for GO, OO, and N scale. So it will actually calculate the speed per the scale that you're running. That's all I got.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Okay, any more show and tell? Anybody else bring anything?
That's impressive.
Okay, before we take a break, I want to do something that I think is long overdue. It takes a lot of people working together to kind of pull meetings off like this. So I'd kind of like to recognize the leadership team and the people involved in these meetings. So would you, and then I'd like to give them a hand afterwards. So would you stand up when I call your name? Trapper? David Grind? Joe Lysing? Joe, are you here today?
No, he's in the old country.
Okay. Jim Ogden and Cole Nash, please stand up. Russell, please stand up. And Deborah, and you can represent Deborah too.
Yeah.
Okay. Jim Davis in operations. Mike Mackey, our AP advisor. And speaker of the, in general. David Haggard and McGinley, who are the editors for the Whistle. Chris and Cody Atkins, who finally showed up today. Guys, stand up so we can see who you are. Chris Atkins is our North Texas Council of Trade Show Coordinator. Mike Ross, Membership Chairman. Mike is attending via Zoom today. David Crumpton, Assistant Membership Coordinator. David Caranda, our videographer. Chris, who you just saw, Chris, please stand up. He's our new Communications Coordinator. and Steve Brackey, last but not least, the old man of the group, but the spry young gentleman who knows his website. So let's give these guys a big hand and do a lot of work. And their efforts appreciated. Also, I mean, we got Dwayne and Jeff Palmer come over here from Division 3 all the time, part of the region. So thank you guys for coming. We appreciate you being here. Okay, let's take a break. Tom Pearson's here. I'm putting on his presentation. Let's take let's take about a 10-minute break. It's 10:45 right now, so we'll kick it off at 10:55. Thank you. Okay, our clinic today is how to wire your layout for peak performance, and it's presented by Tom Pearson. So let's give him a big hand, and Tom.
All right. Well, I'm glad I got the applause beforehand. So anyway, as most of you know, I do a lot of under the table stuff both here and in Central Texas. And I'm not a bits and bytes guy. I'm a practical electrical guy. So as much as I'd love to understand how all that Arduino stuff works and whatever, I've gone to speech clinic a couple times. I really haven't gone back and studied it. So live and learn. So today we're just going to talk about wiring. And
Hey, Tom, hold on a second. Hey, guys in the back of the room, can we have your attention up here, please? Or do you want to share what you're talking about? Put it on the clinic.
So anyway, the first thing I'd offer is that the print's going to be kind of small. Some of these things we probably ought to do with the projector rather than the TV. I hate to say that, but so that you can make it bigger. But anyway, so we're going to, next slide's fine back there. This is me in Austin, Texas. Actually, this was an operating problem at Pete Guy's railroad. It's called Conundrum in Pacific. He actually has a little town called Conundrum. This is all switchbacks and whatever. This is another yard, but I actually helped him wire it and whatever back in the day. Next slide. So we're going to start at the wall. So I always like to tell folks it's better to consider a master switch so you can turn your railroad off and leave the room. It's kind of nice. Some people have a little pilot light, whatever, but it helps to be able to know for sure that everything is truly off. The next thing down it talks about, it's very tempting to add 110 volt lighting under your bench work. And because, you know, the outlet is at the wall and you know, depending on who put the outlets in the wall, they may be, you know, 8 feet apart. They might be as much as 12 feet apart, which means you got extension cords or whatever. But be real careful. First of all, you know, when I do it, I typically, the last ones I've done, I've used this ArmorFlex cable. You can buy 100 feet for about $70, 14.3 with ground, and I build a whole little network, and that way it's both mechanically protected and it provides some small degree of electrical isolation to 110. So as we'll talk about, you want to make sure that you keep, you know, your DCC or even your DC wires not running parallel through the same hole in the benchwork as your 110. Most folks, years ago, they talked about hooking up a DCC system to ground, but now they're saying don't do that, unless maybe you think you have a real static electricity problem, which as of today we probably don't have with all the humidity. And then some people do it through like a 1,000,000 ohm resistor, like the people use on their little static armrest. But there are many times there is a common wire that they want you to run between your command station and the boosters and whatever for a reference point. And they'll call it a ground on some of the systems, but it's really a common. Okay, so it just has the same polarity. And anyway, so that's, and then the other interesting thing, I just got back from a quick trip to Austin, but a couple of folks down there who you may know, David Barrow and or Tommy Holt, they both have the ability to shut off the railroad with a switch, but actually, in fact, both of them have had damage from nearby lightning, not a direct strike, nearby lightning in the neighborhood that damaged some of their components. And so that lightning is really crazy stuff. And so if you really or absolutely want to be sure, I hate to say it, but you ought to unplug. And so anyway, all right, now let's go on to, we'll pretend like we've got it hooked up. All right, so if you're wiring the room, if you're starting from scratch, it's kind of nice to have a separate circuit for your lighting, your tool power when you're building the railroad, and then finally your track power. If you don't, we just have a message. Oh, no, we lost it. Okay, so.
Sorry, hang on, let me
All right.
reload.
No big deal. Did my program blow up? No.
Yeah, there's something with your discs. Right. It's not liking.
Okay.
But
Sorry about
keep
that.
it running. It's okay.
Okay. Anyway, I never load a 110 volt circuit more than 75%. So just FYI, so if it's and just for a rule of thumb, two 40-foot fluorescent bulbs are about 0.8 amps, and an incandescent bulb can be estimated by dividing the wattage by 110. That's more than you probably need to know. Wire size for 110 volt wiring, 20 gauge is for 20 amp circuits, 15 gauge is for 15 amp circuits. I do a lot of 15 amp circuits because I think 12 gauge wiring is hard to work with. It's stiff, whatever. But we lost it again, huh?
No.
Oh, okay. Here's another reminder to keep the 110 volt wiring away from the voltage wiring, and then also keep it away from any kind of mechanical damage. It's not a 110 volt story, but years ago, Laurel Joyner had a wonderful railroad in San Antonio with someone who may have visited. Right before the National Air Gauge was supposed to be there back in, whatever, one of his workers was getting ready to help out, and he had the sawzall out, and he cut through the main bus wires, and basically decapitated the railroad. So, anyway, and you don't want to do that with 110 volt wiring because the results will be shocking. I'll tell you another scary story. I have a friend in Austin. He decided he wanted to have 110 volt lights between the decks on his railroad. Okay, he used individual wires. He picked, for the colors, he picked black and white, kind of like house wiring, right? Guess what his track bus was? Red and black. Guess what happened? Yeah, we destroyed his command station. He almost, he did shock a friend of mine who was working on the system because I got the call. What's going on? But anyway, be real careful. Now we have, in this day and age, of course, we've got all these wonderful low voltage LED solutions that we use for lighting under things, but be careful. Please be careful. Okay, next one. This is an example of benchwork. This is a picture from the Seavers benchwork site. And if you're building your railroad, before you assemble, you put the top on, I'd recommend you drill a bunch of holes in your benchwork. Because starting at the edge toward the aisle, I always like to have a 1/2 inch hole. And that 1/2 inch hole takes, for a DCC later, takes the cab bus, okay? The reason why it's 1/2 inch, if you happen to have it pre-terminated with a cute little connector on the end, it'll fit through a 1/2 inch hole, okay? The next hole over is optional, but what I like to do is have 2 holes. I use for those 2 wires for the track bus. I like to separate them, okay? Now there's a couple of schools of thought about twisting and all that other stuff. I've gone with the distance thing, never had a problem. The other advantage of not twisting and separating them, when you go to put your track feeder on there, it's a darn sight easier because you're standing on your head and whatever. The next hole over, when it could be there, is what I call the accessory bus, and that has 12 volts in it, probably. In my case, I typically have 3 wires. I've got a plus 12 and a minus 12 and a neutral. Okay, so that's how I lay out the wiring on a railroad in stages from front to back. Okay, so all right, next slide.
Tom,
Sir,
can you explain why you have a plus 12 and a minus 12?
I will in just a minute.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, this is my son offered to help me, and it's kind of hard to see, but I was talking about how you organize. This is a DCC system, so I think of it as an organization chart. Okay, the head of the organization chart is the command station. Okay, now some systems there is a booster built right into the command station. Other systems have a separate booster, so that's the next 2 level down. Okay, and then below the boosters you have circuit breakers. Okay, and then below that you have blocks. I tell folks, if in fact you're converting a DC system, which I've done several of, go ahead and leave the toggles in. They make a great isolation. If you're trying to troubleshoot that short, that you can't find, well, being able to shut off that track is also very time useful. So anyway, that's the going down toward the track. Okay, next slide. In terms of this, how many boosters do you need? It's based on the total current supply you need to run all your locomotives. I apologize if this is DCC, but it's also kind of DC. And it's amazing how many locomotives you can run with 5 amps. And so, you know, you may or may not need an extra booster. And then the number of power districts, I divide my railroad into power districts, which I think is more important. These are zones, or they may be super blocks. Is where are people operating? The most likely cause of a short is to have one of your operators run through a switch. We know you fixed all the derailment problems. It's going to run through the switch. And so what is really nice is not to have that operator take down the entire railroad. And so everybody's sitting over there saying, hey, I got no power, my engine's not running. So you get it down to one person. So for example, if you have a yard, typically you have one person or 2 people standing next to you in the yard. Makes a great power district. Okay, the main line is a good one. And if you got main line east, main line west, maybe you got 2 of them. Okay, once again, it's not so much for current protection, but you know, keep people from knocking each other down and just work your way around the thing that way. So anyway, the wire size for the track buses depends on how long they are. This is the really paranoid version, which talks about the length, because it's out and back. You know, they cut this thing in half. My experience has been 14 gauge works up to 30 feet, and all things considered, you probably shouldn't have a power district unless you got you can do it right in the middle, so the 30 feet each direction. You're not going to have a problem. Okay. The other thing is 14 gauge is a lot easier to work with. The next thing up is I'm a big proponent of suitcase connectors. When I worked at 3M, we called them auto taps. You pick the correct size, they work terrific. The correct size for a 14 gauge bus and an 18 to 22 feeder is what they call a 3M 905. It's red and it has 2 different size slots. Okay, there are some lookalikes out there, and they are just run 18 to 22. There's even some that are 14 to 18. So be careful, you know, ask questions before you buy them if you go that route. So anyway, next slide. Okay, this is an example of a sub bus setup. Like for example, if you're running with some kind of occupancy detection, and I'm talking about current-based occupancy detection as opposed to infrared or whatever, is that the track is now fed from a bus that is powered through a detector. Okay, and so there's really.
Hang on a second.
Yeah.
I'm seeing something weird on the downstream feed. I'm going to read part to share screen just to make sure this is coming through.
Okay.
There we go.
So with malice aforethought, okay, you can go ahead and add that. You basically are going to have a black. I use black for the common in the DCC, and then you could have, I'll say, a red bus, and then you have another bus. The last railroad I'm working on right now in Salado, I made this other bus yellow, okay? And that bus, so the red bus and the black bus are connected to the track feeders, okay? And the yellow bus is connected to the same source on the booster as the red bus, okay? But then when I got ready to put the occupancy detectors in, I go in and I cut the red bus at all the block boundaries, okay? And then I hook the detector between the red bus and the yellow bus to power. Okay, so now I've got, individual. I've got each block that's runs through an occupancy detector, and if in fact you have let's say you have a town with a yard in it, okay, and let's say the siding you've got a siding that's also CTC controlled. That would help us. And so now all of a sudden we've got an extra thing. So on that one, I added a blue wire, and the blue wire became the wire to power the red rail inside the, we did this out in the back, so we added a blue rail to power the siding from the detector, and then the red wire powered the main, and then the yellow powers everything else. So all the industries on the backside of the track, the house track, the grain elevator, all the other stuff, those tracks are wired to the yellow bus and the black bus. So they're in the same power district and zone per se, but they're not going through any of the detections. That make sense?
Yes.
Okay, next slide. Okay, talking about track feeders. Track feeders can be 18 to 22, depending on whether you're micros or not, then you may want them to be 18. But the advantage of the 18s are a little bit stiff to work with, and so, sorry, okay. So I typically use 20 to 22. Whether you use solid or stranded isn't that big a deal. However, what I like to do is, years ago, I like to mount my track feeders by hanging the feeder on the bottom flange of the rail. Okay? The old days, we used to we bend it over, we had about at least a 1/4 inch horizontal thing, and then we'd bend it a little bit in toward the flange, and then we'd, try and solder that on while we're holding it up against the rail, soldering and whatever, and it's very easy to end up with a cold solder joint, and they don't look so good. Okay? Yes, they go disappear more or less when you paint them, but they don't look quite as good. So I've chosen, this is not an original idea, but I've chosen to go with the hook method. What I do is I strip, the wire 1/4 inch or so. I bend a little hook on the end of it. My fingers don't bend as good as I used to. A little hook on the end of it. Okay, if it's stranded wire, I tin it first, and I flatten it. Okay, one of my friends in Austin, he actually sets that hook on top of the rail and taps it, flatten it even more. He's using solid wire. Then I tin it and flatten it. Then after I get that little right angle bend in there, I'll go in there and I'll trim that right angle bend off so there's just the smallest of a hook, the smallest possible. Okay, and then when I get ready to bend the hook, put it down the hole, I bend it over the rail. And what that does then is you slide it down the hole, it provides some pre-tension against the rail. Okay, and so now all of a sudden you don't need 3 hands, you only need 2. Okay, all right, next slide. This was intended, I didn't realize I had another feeder in the background, but you can see here as I pre-tin the rail, down at the base of the red wire, there's a little bit of tinning on there. What I do to prepare for that is I've never been a big user of flux, so I mechanically scrape it, take a screwdriver, one of my little model screwdrivers, and I scrape that bottom flange of the rail to remove that oxide. Even though it's nickel silver and it's not supposed to oxide, it actually does. You scrape it a little bit, and then you put flux, you put a drop of flux, then you heat it with the iron, and you put just a little bit of solder on it. Okay? So let's go to the next slide. Now, is there another? There must be let's go back 2. Okay, back to the others. Okay, all right. So then we've got 2 tin surfaces. You put the thing down, and one of the advantages of this smaller thing is heat transfer. Okay, we don't have to transfer the heat as far whatever, and so you can just touch the tip of your iron just to the. We'll cover this in a minute. You touch it just to the right next to the wire and the rail at the same time, and what little solder you probably need, you apply it from the other side. One of the things I'm going to talk about in a minute is soldering 101 for track feeders. And one of the things I'm going to say is the only time the solder touches the iron is when you're tinning the tip. All the rest of the time, if you want a good solder joint, you want the components that you're soldering to draw the solder in. Okay? All right. So here's what it looks like when you get done. All you have is this little thing that's kind of ends up being shaped kind of like a triangle. And it's pretty easy to disguise. If you're up into O scale, I helped a guy in Austin, and we actually drilled the feeders down through a tie. When I put my little hook on there, and a little dollop of solder, it looked like another spike. So anyway, next slide. So here's that soldering 101 thing. You want the smallest diameter rosin core solder you can find. We used to start out, they were big. If you can get 15 thousandths rosin core solder or something like that, better. And this thing here is heat transfer. Okay? So you want to clean the surfaces, you want to have a hot tip, you want the surface to melt the solder. We talk about mechanically cleaning, a little flux. It works, make sure you use some kind of no clean, non-acidic flux. Okay? And you tin the tip of the iron. Now, a lot of people use a paper towel or something to wipe the iron off. I like to use one of those brass brushes. You can buy them at Alltex or whatever. This will look like a Brillo pad, but it's brass. You stick the iron in there, and it'll just smooth it out, and it cleans it, but it doesn't abrade it. Don't ever file your solder tip. They're plated. If the plating goes away, the solder will eventually erode the tip. not eventually, but you'll end up with a really funky looking tip. Okay, and then we talked about doing the, let's talk about, and then before I do we get ready to solder the wire to the rail, I tin the tip again. Tin it now. And the reason why is heat transfer. Liquids do a better job than air of heat transfer. Here's the analogy. You've got your oven at 425 degrees. Okay, you can stick your hand in there, and it's not going to be in there very long, but you can stick your hand in there. Okay? If you had a bowl of water that was 425 degrees, and you stuck your hand in there, what would happen? Just be hurt and quick. Same thing. That little film of solder on the tip of your iron is going to work a lot better. So anyway, okay, so then we got it on there, we apply the tip, we touch the solder to the opposite side of the joint, and then you let the solder flow in. Less is more. I mean, you don't need a lot of solder. So in fact, you've done a decent job tinning the rail and whatever, you may not need any at all. When you get a little tug on the thing to see if you're tight, you move on to the next thing. Okay, next slide. All right, this is the track. We'll talk a little bit about track. Mechanical rail joiners are not a reliable way to transmit power. They do hold the rail in pretty good alignment. I typically solder most of my rail joiners, especially on curves, to make that work. Once again, mechanically clean, and then now we're talking about heat transfer. I typically I lay the iron between the joint on the one end of the joiner up against the rail, and then I move backwards, and then I see whether kind of like if you ever sweat soldered a copper pipe, you see whether the solder gets sucked into the gap between the rail joiner and the rail, and they just move down the rail joiner, and the solder follows. Less is more. When you're cleaning the track, because there's so about as many books and articles written about cleaning track as there are people in this world. The Bright Boy does actually it's okay for removing dried paint and whatever, but for an actual cleaner, it's a little bit too coarse. It leaves micro scratches. And a lot of what we see on track, which we think is dirt, that black stuff that comes off, is actually carbon. There's a micro-arc phenomenon that goes on at that, that Chris could probably explain to us, that happens because of the DCC current or voltage is going through there. If I'm going to use a mechanical cleaner, I use what they call a bright bar, which is much finer, or there's some people who talk about gleaning. You ever seen the articles about gleaning? They go through, they use sand, they start at like 500, they go to 1,000 bit sandpaper, then 2,000, and then what they do is they take a stainless steel washer and they run it back and forth on the top of the rail to try and basically roll whatever bumps are left into a flat surface. That's a lot of trouble.
Four-way layout.
I'm sorry?
Four-way layout.
Yeah. If you're going to cut gaps in the rail, you need to probably put some physical separation in there because they'll grow together. Sure as God made little green apples. And it always happens whenever you have a crowd around. And all of a sudden you've got either a short or you've got a power problem that you weren't expecting. So a little piece of styrene will work. You can melt it in place with the styrene glue, whatever, and then trim it. Chuck Hitchcock up in Stand, he said, just put a little drop of Elmer's white glue in there. It'll suck right in there, it'll dry clear, and if it provides enough, it won't compress completely. You can't squeeze all the way out. The only downside is, because it dries clear, you go back and say, did I do that rail joint or not? It looks clear. That's the only downside of the Elmer's glue. But yeah, it does work. And last but not least, when you get around to painting and weathering, and you're going to spray, I would mask the points, and I would mask the little hinge area. If you don't have turnouts that have the complete rail that's solid all the way up to the frog, it's got that little hinge thingy in there. A lot of them, even if they're DCC friendly, want to have something happen there, so that I would mask that. You don't want to spray paint. Spray paint does a real job on rail joiners too. You don't have them. Okay, next slide. Okay, then let's talk about panels. In the old days, because we had DC panels, we were king of the world. I like to say we weren't running our railroad, or we were running the railroad through a panel instead of running our trains. So anyway, this is an example this is a sub-central panel. Well, the reason why I want to show it to you is this is a kind of a double-ended staging thing connected by a rod on a layout in Troy, Texas. What it has here is LEDs to show the position of the tortoise. Okay, there's a similar thing like this on Lori Pilates layout. Basically, if you put a bicolor LED, red-green LED, in series with the wire going to your tortoise, it'll change color based on polarity. So in this case, the toggle points toward the direction, but of how it's thrown. But there's also a green LED. So if you don't want to call the old, I'll say trust but verify, but you're assuming the tortoise is turned. Voltage. Okay, next slide. This is an example. This one is actually a full railroad. This one was built with a Cato Unitrack, and so all the little toggles are actually the Cato. This is N scale. All their switch machines are actually twin coil, but they operate off DC. And so you have to have a plus minus DC thing. We'll talk about that in a minute. But anyway, just an example of that. All right, next one. So now we're going to talk about what Mike referred to is this plus minus power supply. How many guys are really good at being able to solder all the wires on the back of a double pole, double throw toggle switch to be able to reverse the tortoise? Okay, everybody's good at that. All right. So the thing is, if you think about it, and once again, not an original idea. I got this from Chuck Ellis. So another way to do it is to basically, we're going to change the polarity to the tortoise, but we're going to do it from the wiring rather than down at the layout point, rather than all the way, having to reverse it up in the toggle. So this is an example, and just don't worry about it, but this is a way to build a plus minus power supply using a center tap transformer. It's got some, it's got a bridge direction. It's a bar. Let's see, this one's right there. Far right is the transformer, and there's a couple of circuit breakers that come off of it. Then there's a full wave bridge rectifier, a couple of smoothing capacitors, and then finally you get a plus voltage, a common, and a minus voltage. Okay. The capacitors are in there because I discovered that if you don't smooth that DC ripple out, it sounds kind of like the hum of fluorescent lights if you get enough tortoises under a small layout in a closed thing. Anyway, it also raises the voltage up. So, like for example, this is made with a Radio Shack 12-volt center tap transformer. Okay, and so when it comes out of the transformer and gets rectified, all I have is +6 and -6. That's a little slow. Your tortoise is going to operate really slow. You put the capacitors on there, and because they smooth the voltage, they raise it up, and now it's +9, -9, which is not, it won't snap them, but they move quite fast. Okay, next slide. All right, so here's how it's all wired up when it's all said and done. Now all I have to wire on my toggle switches is 3 wires. Okay, 1 wire from the center part of the toggle switch goes to the tortoise. Okay, 1 wire, one of the outside wires goes to the +12 bus. Okay, and the other side of the toggle switch goes to the -12 bus. Okay, and then on the tortoises, all of one end of each tortoise is just hooked to the common neutral bus. And so now, when you flip that toggle, you've got these 3 points. 3 points. So it's the relative voltage. With it one way, the voltage from here to here is +12, and when you do it the other way, the voltage from here to here is -12, so it reverses. Okay. Now, if you don't want to do that slide I forgot to make this morning, this plus minus power supply, you can do it with two 12-volt wall warts. You just mount them so that they're both oriented. So this is minus plus minus plus. Okay. And now because even though it looks like we're doubling up, they're not that smart, and electrically it works fine. So you still got the minus respect. What we're all worried about is what is the voltage with respect to the center position. Here it's minus, and on this side it's plus. Works fine. Okay. All right. Next slide. Okay. So then this is kind of this is an example of a panel toggle in a panel. When you as you approach operations, I like to have the turnouts be controlled close to where you're at. It does 2 things. One is it slows things down a little bit, which is not bad. Forces the operator to walk up and look at the turnout before he throws it, so he's not cheating. There's that turnout down there. I'm going to throw it on the panel. you know, 20 feet away and hope, you know, that nobody else is coming. Okay, so that does that. With this plus minus system, it's no big deal because you got that plus minus bus running right behind the toggle, wired in there and to the tortoise, and away you go. Okay, so this is use a hole saw, drill like an 1.5 inch hole. You mount your toggle. This happens to be a whole big toggle. We typically use mini ones. Mount the toggle in there on the back because you got your masonite. Most people have masonite fascia, a 1x4, and whatever. So the toggle is going to be recessed. You mount the toggle to a piece of masonite painted black or some other color. You glue it to the back or screw it to the back of the pin short. And there you got your thing. Labeling is important. Okay. You and I built the railroad. We know exactly where everything is and what switches do what, when, where. But for the average guy who may not understand, it's nice to have a label. Okay, this isn't quite as critical because there aren't, you know, a half dozen tortoises within spitting distance. But anyway, all right, next slide. Okay, so here's another way to wire a tortoise with a single 12-volt supply and a single pole double throw switch. And now what we're going to do is we're going to fool the system into having the current go through the path of least resistance. And so what you do is you hook a 1K resistor to each side of the tortoise back to the plus 12 volts, okay? And then the other side of that, those same two connections on the end of the tortoise, they go to this single pole double throw switch and do that. This is very useful if you're moving down the road toward some kind of signaling, like when you see MRI, they typically ground a position when they send a command. So that by grounding one side or the other, you can flip the tortoise. Okay, next one. Now this one's really small. You guys all remember a tortoise has 8 contacts on the bottom. The outboard 2 run the machine itself. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Is it a picture of the tortoise? No. You know, I was messing around with that. Let's go back. Don't bother with that. What I typically do is color coding is important. Labeling is important. You know, and be consistent. I make the outside 2 yellow and white because those don't. I'm using red and black already for my track bus, right? And so I've got these two new colors. All right. They also sometimes will correspond to the my accessory bus. You know, like plus 12 volts might be yellow, and the common is white. Back in my 110 days, but anyway. So anyway, the next 3 on each side provides a single pole double throw switch. Okay. The fourth one, 1, 2, 3, 4. This one is the common pole, and then these 2 are the 2 outputs. So what I do is most of the time is I will say I'm going to say one side of this thing I'm going to use for frog power, assuming I still need it. So I'll have one of these will be black, have a black wire. One of these will have a red wire, and then what in here I use green for frog. It's not original, but whatever. The other side, we're on this side now. It's got 4 of them. This one here, I typically make brown or gray or some oddball color. And then this one is maybe orange and purple or something like that, just so they're different. So you've got your choice of 2 switches you can use to make it also. You could light a signal with it if you wanted to. You got a simple thing, or you could send an electronic signal back to your computer or whatever to do some logic, whatever. Okay, let's go on to the next. Now we're kind of getting into the miscellaneous tips and tricks. Anybody else have any questions about tortoises? Talk fast, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
It's not a question, but you're talking about 2 forwards.
Yeah.
That is actually in the instructions.
Is it in there now?
From Certified. Okay, it tells you exactly how to do it with two forwards.
Yeah.
And I went to that and it's
okay. So that's good.
Just to say. I mean, it's so much easier to use a single pole double throw switch than double pole. It's like, it's always matter with me.
Yeah, yeah. It didn't used to be in there, but yeah, I'm glad they did it. And it's easy, it's easy.
I think they also had the one in with the
oh, okay.
I think that's in there.
Great.
So they show 3 ways to wire it.
Okay.
So I got a question. If you got a plus minus power supply, how do you wire bicolor LEDs into that? Sure.
Oh, The LED goes into the wire going to the tortoise. So it's going to be on one of the two wires between the terminal block. Well, we got, it's going to be I'm sorry?
That's also in the circuit terminal instruction.
Yeah, it is.
Wire that
All you have to do is, the LED is in series with one of the two wires of the tortoise.
Okay.
And if you're doing red, if you have two of them back to back, you mount them back to back and then you hook them up. There you go. The nice thing is the tortoise provides a resistor for the LED so it doesn't go,
well,
it won't handle 12 volts.
One last comment.
Yes, sir.
I have wired that. Using the bicolor is great.
Yeah.
But I used single red and a single green. Okay. They were too bright. The LEDs were too bright. I put a resistor on them. And the time I got a resistor on it where I could actually look at the light bulb.
Yeah.
Before it switched. So the only workaround I have is to use the other three.
Well, you can do a little math and create a parallel circuit and
You need to talk
current
about
divided
that.
thing.
And that's another conversation.
Yeah.
Because I sure wish
Well, the new LEDs are so much more efficient than the old ones. They are all a lot brighter. If you're doing decoders and locomotives where they're all going to find that headlight in it with a 1K resistor in the series with it is, it looks like it would, freeze a deer in its tracks for darn sure. That 2 miles,
Try that on your control panel.
Yeah.
Tortoise needs 10 milliamps to install. So you're gonna need, you have to have an LED that looks like 10 milliamps. Or if you drop it down below 10 milliamps, you're frozen.
Right.
That's what I found.
Yes.
Yeah. Why didn't you tell me that before?
You didn't answer.
Good answer.
You asked me why my twin coil machine won't power my tortoise.
That's enough.
One of the things years ago, people used to use light bulbs as a way to absorb the high current when a short occurred, and then the light bulb would light. Because incandescent bulbs, the filament has a high resistance when it's cold, which goes down as it warms up. Okay, but what I want to show you, the reason why I want this light bulb on here is, if in fact you're switching frog power with a tortoise, okay, there are times when the switch on the tortoise will switch the power to the frog and the tracks that are connected to it before it's ready, and you get a short. And so it'll happen. You'll see that it'll be an instant, just a momentary short when the turnout throws. Okay, and you can play around with that, and you can try and adjust the tension and wobble and all this other kind of stuff. But the easiest way to do it is you put an automotive light bulb in series with the wire going to the frog, okay, and it will take that momentary short and it'll absorb it, and the light may flicker, it may not even come on, but it won't knock down the power to your rig. So that's the reason why that's in there. Okay, next slide. Okay, the next one is another interesting problem is caused by ACO insel frog turnouts. The insel frog, by design, is the frog is supposed to be dead. This challenge was, when they did their tooling, the wires are the two rails coming off the frog are separated by the thinnest piece of plastic you can imagine. Okay? If in fact you have cars with metal wheels that have a relatively flat tread, okay, there's a very good chance that that wheel will bridge across the two rails, and you'll get another momentary short. Okay? So the solution to that is you can get a grinder and try and grind it so you get rid of the rails. The easier way to do it is clear nail polish, and you paint back about a quarter to 3/8 of an inch onto those two rails so that they can't bridge across. So one of those little old shuckses. Okay, next slide. This is an example of an inexpensive adjustable DC voltage regulators. These are called buck converters. You can buy them on eBay for $3 or $4. They don't have a bridge rectifier on the front end. They take a DC in. They recommend they be filtered so you can see the capacitors at the bottom. I build a little circuit board, and then there's the output is at the top. And they got a little screw terminal. You can adjust the voltage up and down. Okay. The one on the far right is just a full wave bridge rectifier. So don't worry about that one. But the two on the left, they're real easy to use. Well, if I've got accessory lighting and whatever, even though the bulbs are rated at 12 volts, I always like to run them a little less than that to make them last longer. And many times even the bulbs are too bright. I mean, unless you got street lights or something that you want to be really bright.
DC here.
This is DC. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So this is back in the days before we had Woodland Scenics with their just plug system. They got LEDs, and of course an LED got to mess with current, but they got their little pots you can do. And my time was more valuable, so I did it this way, plus other stuff has been invented. Okay, next. I'll go with that. We talked about track cleaning and whatever. Joe Fugate did a nice article a year or so ago, talked about all the different things. And he was looking for a material that had a low, what's the term, Chris? Yeah. Well, anyway,
it escaped out of my head as soon as you mentioned Fugate's name.
Well, anyway, it's
solvent that has a low.
Nope. Yeah. I don't think it's dielectric.
No, it's not dielectric.
It's something else. But anyway, this was the material that had the lowest thing. It's a CRC compound. You can find it on Amazon.
What's it called?
CRC Contact Cleaner and Conditioner. Yes, Mike.
There's another product that's got a blue label. You don't want that one, you want this green label. Because the blue label is cleaner only.
Yeah. And
the green label is cleaner and protected.
Yeah. Now, I will tell you that up until I read this article and tried this stuff, I don't have a lot of long experience with it. I used CRC 2-26, which does have a blue label, okay? It's a small can, you could buy it at Home Depot. That was, for me, that was an easy whatever. And so I use this stuff to clean the wheels on things. Spray a little bit on a paper towel, run one envelope of aluminum up on there, spin the wheel, back, pull it back, move the paper towel until it comes out not black anymore, turn the paper towel around, or turn the engine around, put it on reverse, do the same thing, okay? And I've used that 2-26 for, I think that Neverstall's a little expensive for that application. So anyway, now let's talk about the path from the track to the motor. This is not on the slide. That's probably the last slide, I think, right? Oh no, this one just talks about neatness counts. This is the back side of that panel. Whatever. I built the panel here and I shipped it to the guy in New York. And what happened is when he lived in New York, I pre-wired a bench work for him for the railroad. And then a couple years later, he called for the panel. So this has got the blocks are numbered, and there's an input for the plus-minus power supply and the accessory voltage, whatever it is. Neatness counts, label maker is good, etc. So anyway, all right. And then this is another example of neatness. This is a CMRI S-Mini board. This has the old thing where the detectors are all in that row right above it. That was one of the reasons I didn't like the original CMRI detector systems. They were all on a motherboard, which forced you to fan out, whatever. Now the new detectors are all individually. They run off an accessory bus. That's what we have one of those. Right? And then you just run a little small wire back to the S-Mini on the bottom. Okay, what's next? Oh, this is just a quick thing about booster phasing. Every once in a while, you have a situation where, when you're wiring it up, you've got a booster joint, the thing stalls or whatever, and it's not a reversing section. So if you put a meter across the two rails, across the gap, on the AC scale to DCC, you get a voltage of 14 volts, that means they're out of phase. So anyway, I will tell you that the phasing is determined by how the rail sync goes into the booster. So if the plugs are wired backwards, they'll flip that phase for you. And Digitrax had a very bad habit. They had some that were flipped from the factory. So you thought you were being really smart because it's got the rail A and rail B. And I'm using rail A and B all the way around. It didn't work. When I first went up to Leo's place, they had all these extra reversing sections of one. What the heck's going on here? Well, what had happened is they had that one or both of the boosters were flipped. And they put all these reversing sections in to flip it back. And so it worked, kind of. And so I took all that out and I built a special cable up at the booster level so that rail A was always the same polarity coming out of it. But anyway, so all right, next slide. Oh, thank God it's over. But anyway, so, does anybody have any questions? I probably covered it kind of quick and maybe not in the order that you were expecting, but that's all we're talking about locomotives. You have a Proto 2000 locomotive, okay? They notoriously over lubricated from factory. The grease is only partially conductive. I typically pop the thing out. Obviously, I check to make sure the gears aren't split. Okay, I clean everything, dip it in alcohol or something or other, clean everything up. Clean that little U slot. The after the same way, that little rod and bearings is that U slot. Clean those surfaces all off. Clean off the edges of it, and then I go back. This is where I use the Neverstall or 226, something like that that lasts a while. I'll wipe down the U slot with a Q-tip, drop on either end of the axle, makes that bushing, put it all back in, and you won't have to worry about keyboard lights. So anyway, look for that, because a lot of the other thing, if you have a locomotive that's kind of stalling every once in a while, run one end up onto a piece of paper. If it dies, that means that truck that's still out on the track isn't picking up with both sides of the rail. You got a wire that came off, or it's broken, or some darn thing. Could be dirt. But anyway, that's a quick, easy way to check and see whether. Okay. Questions, Mr. Wright?
How many of you guys are familiar with the product he's talking about called Neverstall? Okay, if you're not familiar with it, Mr. Cranda?
Yes.
I sent you a website to bring up, please.
The precursor to this was a product called Conductor. And I believe now even Labelle has one that they say is Conductor 107.
I see affiliate.
Huh?
Oh,
I think there is a number now.
Atlas has something that is a track cleaner conditioner.
Yeah.
Labelle.
Yeah.
And no ops is available.
No ops is available again. Yeah, that's you can get that off of Amazon or whatever. Then there's the wall flip royals. Yes, sir.
Get in there.
Yes, sir.
The term you were looking for is dielectric. You want something with a low dielectric.
Is that right? Is that right, Chris?
Yes.
It is dielectric.
Okay.
Okay.
Make sure you have a polar.
Oh, polar. That's what they talk about now. But the polar value.
But they are rated by the dielectric constant.
Yeah. So anyway.
So where you get the Neverstall is from daylightsales.com.
They'll do shirts for us.
Daylight Sales is the people that make the shirts and everything else, and they also are the ones that supply the logoed shirts for our division and stuff like that. And they're out of California. They're in the Sacramento area. And they sell, that's where you get it. It's their product. Neverstall is their product, their private labeling and everything.
So interestingly, Neverstall has a dielectric constant 2.0. What I do use mineral spirits, which is also a polar 2.1. So,
what do you use, Chris?
Mineral spirits.
Mineral spirit, yes.
Which is better than most of the other ones.
Yes.
But
I only use that on, I just use the Neverstall up because it doesn't evaporate as quick.
Yeah.
So say, I use that up in for bearings and bushings. I use it also as a lubricant.
Your CRC contact cleaner protectant is also 2.0.
Yes.
What's acetone?
Acetone is
Mike?
it's a semi-polar.
Do you have the number for it?
What's it under?
Acetone is, well, first of all, you don't want to use it because it's a semi-polar, and also it's a much higher dielectric constant.
Somebody asked.
Neverstall?
Neverstall, yes, sir.
So I just have a cautionary tale.
Okay.
About the lightning. I've been here for, over 40 years in the
There you go.
DCC since the beginning, and I never unplugged the layout until about 6-8 weeks ago. And there was a lightning strike. I didn't even think that storm had any particularly close.
Yeah.
And it took out 2 chips, one in the command station and one in the booster, which I had repaired. Cost me almost nothing. It was DCC, keep the praise.
Yeah.
However, the control panel has basically died since the strike. It's been acting erratically. So that's a couple $100 loss. So now I go away or the storm's coming, I unplug it. Everything was off. There were 2 surge protectors in lines, doesn't matter with lightning, it'll go right through, so the surge protectors are probably dead too, as far as protecting. Yeah, they still work other ones, so just cautionary tale.
You don't have to be plugged in for lightning. I have it on the radios all the time. They don't have to be plugged in, it's still dry up.
So, yeah, David Nicastro has a big layout in Central Texas, Austin, 1,500 some square feet, and he got hit, the pole behind his house got hit, so it came in, went through all of his passive stuff and came out, and part of it came out into the layout. It was fascinating. For the next 2 years, we were having failures of parts. The first components closest to the stripe were hit dead on arrival, but then there was like, then there was like 75% in the next four. And then we got into no man's land. We had to replace all kinds of stuff. There was no obvious damage, no smoke was let out, but we toasted lots of stuff. So anyway, I don't know. Lightning is a fascinating subject about what it can and can't do and go through and around. It's amazing. Thank you for your time.
Okay, Tom, thank you very much. Anybody got anything else? Okay, next meeting, Ken.
I just want to let you know your membership for this month was 181.
Okay.
The third in the group.
Yeah. We'll let that ride a couple more months before we start getting too excited about it. Thank you very much for everybody. We're gonna, Dave?
Just one quick thing. If you will help us out by stacking the chairs back there on the far side past Jerry's stockyards, we would be most graciously thankful to you. Otherwise, Terry Morris will have to do it. We don't want to overwork him too much.
Okay, our next meeting is the picnic, so we'll be cooking hot dogs. There won't be a program, but it'll be kind of a fellowship and everything like that. So looking forward to having everybody here, and we'll feed you. We'll feed you hot dogs. Okay. Thank you very much.